But not only am I a creative director, I'm an advocate for body inclusivity, especially for pear-shaped women who are the majority in this country. So yes, we do manufacture clothes for pear-shaped women, and we do advocate for body inclusivity across the board. Most of the people that work behind the scenes, or the scenes I'd like to say, are foreigners. A lot of South Africans are short-skilled, and we don't have a lot of South Africans who are skilled in terms of mass clothing production.
So let's just go and link it back to the working market, right? In terms of corporate way. Because I mean, the podcast is all about, we're talking about a person, we're talking about people, it's HR. And I think corporate wear and clothing is also, very important in the workplace. So how do we then cater? Because you spoke about the different body types, and when companies have uniform, it's a specific type. We didn't incorporate the different body types within the organization. So how would you then balance that out for companies that have uniform, or the people that actually want to start, with the corporate way in the organizations? Hi guys, you are watching Couch Talk with LHS, where we have meaningful conversations about HR-related topics, culture, leadership, and the ever-evolving workplace. My name is Neombele, aka Boss Lady, and today I am not by myself. I've got a wonderful guest in studio with us, Rose Nthite. Hi ma'am, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure. So just as a form of intro, I just want to tell people Rose Nthite is a creative director and a fashion entrepreneur. All right, so please tell us what is it that you do, more about your business.
So yes, I am a creative director. I have founded a brand called Titan, a brand specifically for pear-shaped women. But not only am I a creative director, I'm an advocate for body inclusivity, especially for pear-shaped women who are the majority in this country. So yes, we do manufacture clothes for pear-shaped women, and we do advocate for body inclusivity across the board, across the entire fashion spectrum. Yeah.
That's nice, because I've got so many questions as you're speaking, right? So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Titan.
Yes.
How did you come up with the name?
Titan is actually an anagram from my surname, which is Nthite.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just literally just the use of my surname just mixed around.
Oh, that's smart. Okay. Gonna buy my 2000 clock bat.
Oh,
let's
clock that.
All right. Yes. Okay, so let's go back then in terms of what is it that you do, right? You mentioned pear-shaped women. So for people, like in simple terms, for people that don't know what that means, maybe just take us through that.
So you would find that in any country, any nationality, there is different body types, right? And in South Africa, or globally rather, we have the pear-shaped, which is the narrow upper body, smaller waistline, and then fuller hips and thighs. That is what we refer to as pear-shaped. Some people refer to it as triangle, but to be more realistic, a triangle is straight, whereas a pear-shaped gives you the curves, to identify the body. So yes, you find a pear-shaped. You also find a straight body type, which is also a feature in South Africa, although they're the minority, which is what you would find in a white person silhouette, if I could refer to it as that. And then you find the hourglass, which a lot of South Africans or Africans thought we were, where you find your upper body is more is similar to your lower part.
Yeah.
So, but with a a narrow waistline as well. But your upper body would be similar to
the lower body.
Body. It would be in exact proportion, and then we would find obviously your inverted triangle, which are more athletes. Broader shoulders and a narrower going down.
Yes.
So inverted triangle, so an upside down triangle. And then we would find the apple, which is more straight but more bulging towards, your mid or abdomen area. So we have various body types, but the majority with at least close to 70% being pear-shaped women, which are actually not catered for by the fashion industry.
But what inspired your business?
What inspired my business is I myself am pear-shaped, right? And I've actually I've been into clothing rather than fashion. You know, to be quite honest, I think it's just a skill that I was born with. To be able to clothe my body, you know. And a lot of people used to tell me, you know, where do I find my clothes? Where do I buy my clothes? Until I told them it's not really where, but it's what I put on my body that accentuates and flatters my body, that makes me look, you know, elevated, you know, and makes the clothes look more expensive because they're flattering. So it was inspired by me dressing myself and those clothes to me. So with the skill, I found a lot of people asking me to help them dress up, you know, Rose, I'm going to a funeral, Rose, I'm going to unveiling, whatever the case may be. And I've always been an advocate for women to wear dresses. I think dresses are made, you know, when you buy a dress, you are dressed, you're fully dressed. And when you wear a skirt and, you know, the matching.
Exactly.
So I've always advocated for women to wear dresses, and they would come to me, and that's where it all started really, because you know, they would be more confident then, and they would then tell the next person and whatever, and that's where it actually started. So, and I was just doing it for the love of it, you know. So I would actually tell them, go to the store, you might find this, don't go shopping there, you won't be catered for, and such, until I actually thought, you know, this could actually be something I can monetize and that I can turn into something more profitable, because then I realized that it really, the women that came to me represented millions of women that had the same struggles or similar struggles. So, excuse me, that's where it all started.
Okay, that's great. So let's just go and link it back to the working market, right? In terms of corporate way. Because I mean, the podcast is all about, we're talking about a person, we're talking about people, it's HR. And I think corporate wear and clothing is also, you know, very important in the workplace. So how do we then cater, because you spoke about the different body types, you know, and when companies have uniform, it's a specific type. We didn't incorporate the different body types within the organization. So how would you then balance that out for companies that have uniform, or the people that actually want to start, you know, with the corporate way in the organizations?
You don't know. I think for me the fundamental is that when you create uniform or corporate identity, you must understand those people would wear whatever it is you decide upon for 12 hours plus, you know, and you still have the expectation of them to show up and work, you know, and produce results. And I think for me, you have to take into consideration how you are giving them that opportunity, what platform it is you are laying for them to do exactly what it is that is expected. Now, with corporate workwear, I found that you know, it's been standardized for decades really, to cater for the narrower, slim, you know, silhouette, which is not a representation of South Africa. You find the corporate workwear being your pencil skirts and your pencil dresses, and you know, the pants that still gape at the waist, which is not really for the majority of South Africans. You look at, I'm going to mention the banking sector, you find that those women are still wearing the tight skirts, and, you know, they have to adjust, and the blazers that, you know, are longer sleeved and don't button up, because it really was not made for them. So I think as an HR company, or HR as it were, that we need to really take a deep dive and look into who our employees are, and whether we want to be companies that are inclusive, that care for the people, you know, and not only that, but, you know, look at the return on investment that one would then employ, you know. So I believe that there's a lot of room for one to look at inclusivity without bearing too much on the cost of inclusivity, but rather looking more at the investment, you know, that and the returns that will do to their overall, you know, turnover, staff turnover, overall morale of the business or the entity, and you know, such
No,
result.
because you're right. Because I mean, I see it with us. We consulting, right? We go to different customers or clients rather.
Yeah.
So when you get there, you in uniform, you're comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, people, it can radiate already before you even say anything. You're already showing up. So I just wanted to find out from you how does that corporate way, make people show up in the organizations or in their different jobs?
Clothes are no longer just the covering. Uniform is not just the covering. It's an identity. It's an identity. And once somebody feels like whatever I'm wearing is me, and they're able to project that, you see it gives them so much confidence. They no longer are insecure about how they show up. The aesthetics will show you when they walk in that this person is confident through and through. And I think that in itself, I think will, translate in their work.
Yeah.
Eventually.
I mean, just by saying that, I saw a social media post. I think it was on Twitter, if I'm not mistaken. But you see the awareness in us. I mean, we've got different body types where the ladies were saying, they've got fuller bodies, lower bodies, and they feel like when they're wearing pants in the organization, it makes them feel so unprofessional because of, the body. So that importance of the inclusivity, when companies are, talking about corporate wear or they're talking about uniform within the organization, because people are different in the organization, and we're still expecting these people to be inculcated with our culture. But I mean, that everything is intertwined. It is intertwined.
Definitely.
All right.
So you know what it is now that people are now more self-aware.
They are.
People are more self-aware. It's not like before. People would want to look like a mannequin. They are now aware of them having fuller hips, smaller waistline, or maybe being shaped differently. They are aware, and people no longer just want to dress what they're given. They want to have a share and a say in what it is that they put on their bodies now. And it's true, one will look unprofessional if the bums are out, but one does not have a choice. They are there. There's nothing you can do to take that away, and people also shouldn't feel ashamed, But yes, I think, as you say, it might come across as being unprofessional because it is what they are dressed in that makes it look unprofessional.
So
similar to the waist
waist,
gaps.
yes.
Similar to the waist gaps. I mean, you don't want to bend over and have people see your underwear.
Exactly.
That's even worse. So it's that workplace needs to be fully aware that it can be pants, but let it be pants that look professional. The bums and the hips are always going to be there. The thighs are going to be thick, and it is what it is. But let's cater for them. I think there are clothes that actually can be given or supplied to employees and make them absolutely stand out, look more than professional actually.
Yeah. I think it's very important because I mean, like you said, the body is there, the bums are there, we can't hide from it. Exactly, but it's how you dress the body up, just so that at least it gives you that presentable look. But I think when I saw the post, I was very happy because I mean, it's it's a topical discussion.
Millions of women out there.
Yeah, because there was a lot of women that felt like that. But I think this particular lady was brave enough to actually just say, you know what, I'm going to be bare, I'm going to put myself out there. This is how I feel. And there were a lot of comments, and it's things that maybe companies should also look at. Because, I mean, for HR in particular, we create policies. We talk about dress code, what's expected and what's not expected. But we don't deep dive in terms of, like you said, let's accommodate for the different body types, or let's have uniform. What does that come up with, right? So talking about that, have you worked or do you work then with companies, corporate companies, in terms of designing the uniform? And what is the process maybe that you take?
So definitely. So what the strategy we employ is, obviously, as an advocate, I've had to develop an IP, intellectual property, with regards to sizing and fit, right? That can then be reproduced and that can be, that would have a strong foundation and more lasting, results. So that's what we're busy with. However, what we've been doing in the interim is testing out that IP without it being out there to see that whatever it is we've put in is actually a true reflection. Look, we speak about sorry, I'm just going to go off on a tangent a bit, but we speak of the smaller waist, we speak of the fuller hips, but there's more to it. I mean, there's the thicker
of course
arms. We Africans tend to have more thicker upper arms than your normal, and actually smaller backs, but people don't take that into considerations because they don't know. So we've had the privilege to work with Tshwane University of Technology to redefine that through body inclusivity. We've had the opportunity to work with University of Pretoria, with regards to the anthropometric studies, which is the different body shapes and where, the dimensions that actually need to be adjusted and so forth. So, yes, I've had the privilege to actually test out our IP within the security industry. So yes, I've worked with companies where we've redeveloped their uniform to make sure that it fits better. And as we know, our security industry needs a lot of transformation, one of which being uniform, because you find a lot of females wearing male clothing, male uniform, and it seems to be a standard across many of the security companies. So we'd like to change that because, as I said, you're in uniform for 12 plus hours a day, and nobody wants to be wearing male clothes when they're females. Same as men would not want to be wearing dresses, same as women, the grey flannel pants that are made for men, the white collared shirts or whatever collared shirts that are made for men, and the pullovers, for men. So that's predominantly where I've actually tested it out. But more than that, any opportunity for us to test out our intellectual property definitely, gives more credit, and to the property and more reference so that we can see it actually is working.
Okay. And then for companies that are interested, obviously, in terms of uniform, but we don't know where to start, how to start, and maybe like you said, I would not necessarily want to. Not necessarily accommodate all the body types. I would want to, but I wouldn't want to have different uniform type for the different body types. So what would your advice be then for those particular companies?
So that seems to be one of the major concerns for not only companies, but throughout fashion as it is. Look, like I said, there's the majority. And we want to cater for the majority more than the minority. So we still have the same dress. We design that, but you'd find that it fits. It actually is what it is you want to achieve. Different companies have different ideologies and their own outlook and identity, but we can work around that. There's a couple of patterns and silhouettes and dresses that one, for example, I'm just going to mention dresses because that's what seems to be the norm within the corporate space. But yes, dresses and skirts that seem to work across. And like I say, with our IP, we have the flexibility, especially across the waistline. So we've got adjustables. So yes, we cater for a narrower waistline, but you can adjust. You can adjust it to fit somebody that's slightly
okay,
so yes,
okay,
yes.
Well, that makes sense then. So before we continue with our episode, just as a reminder, please remember that there is an AXO conference happening on the 23rd of June at the NH Hotel in Sandton. So see you there. Don't forget about it and save the date. Thank you so much then, Rose. Just one thing that I'm very passionate about, and I know it can be sometimes a very lonely journey, that's entrepreneurship, right? Yeah. How are you finding your experience in the space, being an entrepreneur?
Sure. I've been an entrepreneur for, I think 15 years plus. However, a fashion entrepreneur since 2024, effectively. And I've tapped into spaces that have never really been touched, and which is why I've had to actually pause production for Titan, because I found that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done within the clothing and textile industry in South Africa. We face a lot of challenges, one being our workforce. Most of the people that work behind the scenes, or the scenes I'd like to say, are foreigners. A lot of South Africans are short-skilled, and we don't have a lot of South Africans who are skilled in terms of mass clothing production. So I've had to start there. And not only there, but when I came in and trying to redefine the narrative of what is now the global template of manufacturing clothes, I've had to start it right at the beginning, drawing out the IP that, somebody, obviously, I always say somebody sat down and decided, this is how we're going to make clothes. These are the dimensions we're going to use as a template. And unfortunately, it does not work for South Africans, for the majority of South Africans. So I've had to sit down and redefine that and research research quite extensively on that. So it's been challenging because I've had to start right at the grassroots, redefining. So people come into the industry and say, I'm in fashion, I do this, but they literally are carrying on a template that does not work. They keep on using the same size charts that do not work, that do not reflect who we are, which is a problem. You go to one store, you're a size 32, the next you're 34, the next you're a medium, the other you're small, redefining that to be what it is, to be standardized, even in one store sometimes. You will find at Woolworths, for example, in a different brand, you are medium, in another brand, you're, those kind of things. So having to standardize that, because like I said, clothes are no longer a covering, and, sizes are also frustrating, and nobody wants to go to the stores anymore now because they're like,
that's true.
Nothing really fits.
I'm a different size all the time. That's why.
So I find that there's a lot that needs to be done, and I think that's the space that I'm in at the moment, where I'm trying to redefine a lot of things so that when it starts off, we don't have to go back and forth. It's sort of there, implementing it and continuing on from there.
Okay.
So it's been a challenging journey. This is I've been in business, like I say, for 15 years plus, but this has been the most challenging experience yet.
It comes and goes. Yeah. We just have to pull through the challenges.
Yeah.
You mentioned one important thing, right? Because part and parcel of the podcast is to try and connect employers to employees, or candidates rather, because we want to bridge that gap. We've got a serious problem in South Africa with the high unemployment rate, right? And you mentioned that a lot of our South African people are not necessarily in the industry or in the space of mass production. So for people that are interested, sitting there looking at you, that are interested, how can we go about? What can we do? What is your advice? Just so that at least people know that, because some people just know fashion designing as what it is, but which industries, what type, what do I do?
What I can tell you is there's a specific demand in the various types of sectors within the fashion industry, specifically pattern making. We don't have pattern makers. We have a shortfall. I can tell you in Pretoria, there's about 5 pattern makers, and they're all old, maybe with one young one who still does things manually. I was just talking to her the other day, who still does things manually, and we're in a digital era now. So the others, they're overloaded with work, overwhelmed. I mean, the amount of demand that is out there for pattern makers. Remember, you can't start a clothing brand without patterns, because how do we then cut whatever that it is? So we need pattern makers. There's a high demand in pattern makers. There's a high demand in, obviously, people that would stitch. So your seamsters. But if they want to and they're really interested, and I mean people that are really interested, not those that think of the glamour that comes with fashion. There's a lot of not so glamorous things that
behind the scenes. Yeah.
So those that really want to see themselves in fashion, that want to see our economy grow, that want to see the fashion industry grow and not really being overtaken by Shein and Temu and others, then they can hit me up on the socials, and I'll direct them to the various companies that I know are looking, because I engage a lot with manufacturers, I engage a lot with smaller clothing brands. They come to me, and the first thing we do is I cannot really assist them without the patterns, and that's the first and foremost, and there's a lot of opportunities there. So anyone interested can hit me up on the socials. I'll definitely link them up.
Great. All right. And then lastly, maybe from my side, so if people are interested in working with you, maybe companies would say, you know what, I think this is the first point. Let's just have a consultation. How do they reach you?
So with helping or assisting companies, I use my company called Clothes for Africa. That is where we then tap into your space and into your company and advise, whether it is just with advising your employees how to show up to work, whether it's with uniform or without. also not only in uniform, but outside the office as a brand. You know, people will know Neo outside the office, but Neo still carries a particular identity and brand. You know, so whether it is just coming to talk to the employees or obviously advising them on dress code or workwear, they can contact me. I don't know if I should read out my
Yes, you can.
numbers.
Yes, we will also share your details after the episode.
On
but you can.
071 8977 995. Yeah, 071 8977 995. They can also drop us an email at info@clothes for Africa, the number 4. .co.za, and yeah.
Okay,
we'll
that's quite interesting. I know I said it was going to be my last question, but now you just brought an interesting dynamic to it. So the consultations is speaking to the employees, regardless whether they've got uniform or not, in the different companies. Okay, that's great. Yeah.
And I think there's something that I also want to touch on, because you know we spoke about corporate workwear,
yes,
but there's also what is known to be traditional workwear. And people don't seem to understand the difference, especially HR professionals. You know,
we are in hot waters.
Yes, especially HR professionals. You know, I just wanted to touch on that. That you know, even with those that wear it, that there's a huge difference. You know, your traditional workwear is what we refer to as
your PPE.
Your PPE. You know, something that is practical.
Yeah.
You know, and is there for safety. That comes as a one size fits all. Or one size fits some, you know, that is more about safety and uniformity, not really caring about your individuality, you know. But corporate workwear or corporate fashion is quite different. It's what you project, not PPE that protects.
Yes.
You know, corporate fashion is what you project. So leadership, authority, and you cannot show that, you know, with, like I said, blazers that don't fit, and you know, skirts that are still too tight, and you know, things like that. So there's a distinct difference between your traditional and your corporate, and more companies tend to lean towards the corporate fashion, thinking that it would be the same as traditional. With corporate, we look at individuality and what we're trying to achieve as a company.
And then if you, so because you're mentioning it's corporate workwear, which is individual, and uniform is about safety, not uniform, the traditional, the traditional, which is PPE, it's about safety. In that case, we don't care about...
Yes, you don't care about the sizes or how it looks.
How it looks, it's about
safety
the whole
and
purpose. Yes, the purpose that it was made for.
But then the mindsets tend to, you know, spill over to the other side, where you still want to provide uniform but not care about individuality, not care about the sizing, and not care about, you know, what you're trying to achieve. You still take the same mindset as PPE onto the corporate workwear, and those are two different elements.
Oh, okay. So just on the last point, I mean, we had a previous talker that spoke about culture. Right, and I'm just thinking, as you're talking about, you know, uniform, corporate way, it's about the culture that you're incorporating this uniform. It's not about the fact that I'm just going to select uniform and that's it, we're going to go with that. So it's about collaboration with your employees.
Definitely.
And getting buy-in from those particular employees in terms of selecting. But what have you seen then in that instance where employees are being incorporated, you know, with selecting the uniform versus this is what we're going to wear, take it?
You know what, I've seen once your employees have a say in what it is that they wear, you know, you've given them a choice to represent themselves, you know, to present themselves in a different way, and to feel proud to be associated with whatever it is that they put on every single day. Not only does it translate in, like I mentioned earlier, the morale of the company, the overall staff retention, you know, it gives them a sense of belonging. Yeah. It gives them the confidence, and they feel seen and cared for by their leaders, and obviously heard. And who does not want that? Exactly. You know, so I've seen that and they're able to. It goes beyond just them in uniform. It translates in other smaller things as well. You know, how they will show up for you, how they will defend the company, you know, to others. So it goes just beyond the actual uniform. It's more of an identity and who they belong to, or who they are for those 12 hours that they are in this particular brand.
Not true. And I think it's also how they present themselves. Like you said, how they show up in the working environment.
Definitely.
Rose, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I think we've learned a couple of things,
Yeah.
especially from an HR perspective, because we are the ones that are developing policies and dress code policies. But now it's how do we then become inclusive and work with our employees with regards to those corporate ways versus the traditional way.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming through.
You're
We
welcome.
really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So remember, if you've got a story to tell or you want to share your experience, you can hit us up on marketing@letalohr.co.za. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And like I always say, you don't have to take everything from the podcast, but at least take one thing with you. Until the next episode, bye.